Hello, welcome back to Boring Fantasy for Sleep. Tonight is episode 3 of The King of Elfland's D. Order by Lord Dunsany. In episode 2, Alveric reached the palace of the Elf King. He met Lirazel, the Elf King's daughter, immortal, and curious about the world on the other side of the border. He brought her back with him through the wall of twilight and into the fields we know and into time. And Ziroonderel looked at her and said the things she said. She has come from too far. Lirazel has been in the mortal world for some years now. She and Alveric have a son, Orion, who has the look of Elfland about him. And Lirazel is happy after a fashion, and unhappy after another fashion, in the way that someone is unhappy when the world they are living in is beautiful, but is not quite the world they are made for. Tonight, something is sent across the border. This is episode 3, Lirazel Blows Away, chapter 7, 8, and 9.
Chapter 7. The Coming of the Troll. When the troll came to the frontier of twilight, he skipped nimbly through. Yet he emerged cautiously into the fields we know, for he was afraid of dogs. Slipping quietly out of those dense masses of twilight, he came so softly into our fields that no eye had seen him, unless it were gazing already at the spot at which he appeared. There he paused for some instants, looking to left and right, and seeing no dogs, he left the barrier of twilight. This troll had never before been in the fields we know, yet he knew well to avoid dogs. For the fear of dogs is so deep and universal amongst all that are less than man, that it seems to have passed even beyond our boundaries, and to have been felt in Elfland. In our fields it was now May, and the buttercups stretched away before the troll. A world of yellow mingled with the brown of the budding grasses. When he saw so many buttercups shining there, the wealth of earth astonished him, and soon he was moving through them, yellowing his shins as he went. He had not gone far from Elfland when he met with a hare, who was lying in a comfortable arrangement of grass, in which he had intended to pass the time till he should have things to see to. When the hare saw the troll, he sat there without any movement whatever, and without any expression in his eyes, and did nothing at all but think. When the troll saw the hare, he skipped nearer, and lay down before it in the buttercups, and asked it the way to the haunts of men. And the hare went on thinking. "Thing of these fields," repeated the troll, "where are the haunts of men?" The hare got up then, and walked towards the troll, which made the hare look very ridiculous, for he had none of the grace while walking that he has when he runs or gambols, and was much lower in front than behind. He put his nose into the troll's face and twitched foolish whiskers. "Tell me the way," said the troll. When the hare perceived that the troll did not smell of anything like dog, he was content to let the troll question him. But he did not understand the language of Elfland, so he lay still again, and thought while the troll talked. And at last, the troll wearied of getting no answer. So he leaped up and shouted, "Dogs!" and left the hare and scampered away merrily over the buttercups, taking any direction that led away from Elfland. And though the hare could not quite understand Elvish language, yet there was a vehemence in the tone in which the troll had shouted dogs which caused apprehension to enter the thoughts of the hare, so that very soon he forsook his arrangement of grass and lolloped away through the meadow with one scornful look after the troll. But he did not go very fast, going mostly on 3 legs, with one hind leg all ready to let down if there should really be dogs. And soon he paused and sat up and put up his ears and looked across the buttercups and thought deeply. And before the hare had ceased to ponder the troll's meaning, the troll was far out of sight and had forgotten what he had said. And soon he saw the gables of a farmhouse rise up beyond a hedge. They seemed to look at him with little windows up under red tiles. "A haunt of man," said the troll, and yet some elvish instinct seemed to tell him that it was not here that Princess Lirazel had come. Still, he went nearer the farm and began to gaze at its poultry. But just at that moment, a dog saw him, one that had never seen a troll before, and it uttered one canine cry of astonished indignation, and keeping all the rest of its breath for the chase, sped after the troll. The troll began at once to rise and dip over the buttercups, as though he had almost borrowed its speed from the swallow, and were riding the lower air. Such speed was new to the dog, and he went in a long curve after the troll, leaning over as he went, his mouth open and silent, the wind rippling all the way from his nose to his tail in one wavy current. The curve was made by the dog's baffled hopes to catch the troll as he slanted across. Soon he was straight behind, and the troll toyed with speed, breathing the flowery air in long, fresh draughts above the tops of the buttercups. He thought no more of the dog, but he did not cease in the flight that the dog had caused because of the joy of the speed. And this strange chase continued over those fields, the troll driven on by joy and the dog by duty. For the sake of novelty, then the troll put his feet together as he leaped over the flowers, and alighting with rigid knees, fell forwards onto his hands, and so turned over, and straightening his elbows suddenly as he turned, shot himself into the air, still turning over and over. He did this several times, increasing the indignation of the dog, who knew well enough that that was no way to go over the fields we know. But for all his indignation, the dog had seen clear enough that he would never catch that troll. And presently, he returned to the farm and found his master there, and went up to him, wagging his tail. So hard he wagged it that the farmer was sure he had done some useful thing, and patted him. And there the matter ended. And it was well enough for the farmer that his dog has chased that troll from his farm. For had it communicated to his livestock any of the wonder of Elfland, they would have mocked at man, and that farmer would have lost the allegiance of all but his staunch dog. And the troll went on gaily over the tips of the buttercups. Presently, he saw rising up all white over the flowers a fox that was facing him with his white chest and chin, and watching the troll as it went. The troll went near to him and took a look, and the fox went on watching him, for the fox watches all things. He had come back lately to those dewy fields from slinking by night along the boundary of twilight that lies between here and Elfland. He even prowls inside the very boundary, walking amongst the twilight. And it is in the mystery of that heavy twilight that lies between here and there that there clings to him some of that glamour that he brings with him to our fields. "Well, no man's dog," said the troll, for they know the fox in Elfland from seeing him often go dimly along their borders, and this is the name they give him. "Well, thing over the border," said the fox when he answered at all, for he knew troll talk. "Are the haunts of men near here?" said the troll. The fox moved his whiskers by slightly wrinkling his lip. Like all liars, he reflected before he spoke, and sometimes even let wise silences do better than speech. Men live here and men live there, said the fox. I want their haunts, said the troll. What for? Said the fox. I have a message from the king of Elfland. The fox showed no respect or fear at the mention of that dread name, but slightly moved his head and eyes to conceal the awe that he felt. If it is a message, he said, their haunts are over there. And he pointed with his long, thin nose towards Earl. How shall I know when I get there? Said the troll. By the smell, said the fox. It is a big haunt of men, and the smell is dreadful. Thanks, Noman's dog, said the troll, and he seldom thanked anyone. I should never go near them, said the fox, but for... And he paused and reflected silently. But for what? Said the troll. But for their poultry. And he fell into a grave silence. Goodbye, Noman's dog, said the troll, and turned head over heels, and was off on his way to Earl. Passing over the buttercups all through the dewy morning, the troll was far on his way by the afternoon, and saw before evening the smoke and the towers of Earl. It was all sunk in a hollow, and gables and chimneys and towers peered over the lip of the valley, and smoke hung over them on the dreamy air. The haunts of men, said the troll. Then he sat down amongst the grasses and looked at it. Presently he went nearer and looked at it again. He did not like the look of the smoke and that crowd of gables. Certainly it smelt dreadfully. There had been some legend in Elfland of the wisdom of man, and whatever respect that legend had gained for us in the light mind of the troll, now all blew lightly away as he looked at the crowded houses. And as he looked at them, there passed a child of 4, a small girl on a footpath over the fields, going home in the evening to Earl. They looked at each other with round eyes. Hello, said the child. Hello, child of men, said the troll. He was not speaking troll talk now, but the language of Elfland, that grander tongue that he had had to speak when he was before the king. For he knew the language of Elfland, although it was never used in the homes of the trolls, who preferred troll talk. This language was spoken in those days also by men, for there were fewer languages then, and the elves and the people of Earl both used the same. What are you? Said the child. A troll of Elfland, answered the troll. So I thought, said the child. Where are you going, child of men? The troll asked. To the houses, the child replied. We don't want to go there, said the troll. No, said the child. Come to Elfland, the troll said. The child thought for a while. Other children had gone, and the elves always sent a changeling in their place, so that nobody quite missed them, and nobody really knew. She thought a while of the wonder and wildness of Elfland, and then of her own home. No, said the child. Why not? Said the troll. Mother made a jam roll this morning, said the child, and she walked on gravely home. Had it not been for that chance jam roll, she had gone to Elfland. Jam, said the troll contemptuously, and thought of the tarns of Elfland, the great lily leaves lying flat upon their solemn waters, the huge blue lilies towering into the elf light above the green deep tarns. For jam this child had forsaken them. Then he thought of his duty again, the roll of parchment, and the elf king's rune for his daughter. He had carried the parchment in his left hand when he ran, in his mouth when he somersaulted over the buttercups. Was the princess here, he thought? Or were there other haunts of men? As the evening drew in, he crept nearer and nearer the homes, to hear without being seen. Chapter 8. The Arrival of the Rune. On a sunny May morning in Earl, the witch Ziroonderel sat in the castle nursery by the fire, cooking a meal for the baby. The boy was now 3 years old, and still Lirazel had not named him, for she feared lest some jealous spirit of earth or air should hear the name, and if so, she would not say what she feared then. And Alveric had said he must be named, and the boy could bowl a hoop. For the witch had gone one misty night to her hill, and had brought him a moon halo, which she got by enchantment at moonrise, and had hammered it into a hoop, and had made him a little rod of thunderbolt iron with which to beat it along. And now the boy was waiting for his breakfast, and there was a spell across the threshold to keep the nursery snug, which Ziroonderel had put there with a wave of her ebon stick, and it kept out rats and mice and dogs, nor could bats sail across it, and the watchful nursery cat it kept at home. No lock that blacksmiths made was any stronger. Suddenly, over the threshold and over the spell, the troll jumped somersaulting through the air and came down sitting. The crude wooden nursery clock hanging over the fire stopped its loud tick as he came, for he bore with him a little charm against time, with strange grass round one of his fingers, that he might not be withered away in the fields we know. For well, the Elf King knew the flight of our hours. 4 years had swept over these fields of ours, while he had boomed down his brazen steps and sent for his troll, and given him that spell to bind round one of his fingers. "What's this?" said Ziroonderel. That troll knew well when to be impudent, but looking in the witch's eyes saw something to be afraid of. And well he might, for those eyes had looked in the Elf King's own. Therefore he played, as we say in these fields, his best card, and answered, "A message from the King of Elfland." "Is that so?" said the old witch. "Yes, yes," she added more lowly to herself. "That would be for my lady. Yes, that would come." The troll sat still on the floor, fingering the roll of parchment inside of which was written the rune of the King of Elfland. Then over the end of his bed, as he waited for breakfast, the baby saw the troll and asked him who he was and where he came from and what he was able to do. When the baby asked him what he was able to do, the troll jumped up and skipped about the room like a moth on a lamplit ceiling. From floor to shelves and back and up again, he went with leaps like flying. The baby clapped his hands. The cat was furious. The witch raised her ebon stick and made a charm against leaping. But it could not hold the troll. He leaped and bounced and bounded, while the cat hissed all the curses that the feline language knows. And Ziroonderel was wrath, not only because her magic was thwarted, but because with mere human alarm she feared for her cups and saucers. And the baby shouted all the while for more. And all at once, the troll remembered his errand, and the dread parchment he bore. "Where is the Princess Lirazel?" he said to the witch. And the witch pointed the way to the princess's tower, for she knew that there were no means nor power she had by which to hinder a rune from the King of Elfland. And as the troll turned to go, Lirazel entered the room. He bowed all low before this great lady of Elfland, and with all his impudence in a moment lost, kneeled on one knee before the blaze of her beauty and presented the Elf King's rune. The boy was shouting to his mother to demand more leaps from the troll as she took the scroll in her hand. The cat, with her back to a box, was watching alertly. Ziroonderel was all silent. And then the troll thought of the weed-green tarns of Elfland in the woods that the trolls knew. he thought of the wonder of the unwithering flowers that time has never touched, the deep, deep colour, and the perpetual calm. His errand was over, and he was weary of earth. For a moment nothing moved there but the baby, shouting for new troll antics and waving his arms. Lirazel stood with the elfin scroll in her hand. The troll knelt before her. The witch never stirred. The cat stood watching fiercely. Even the clock was still. Then the princess moved and the troll rose to his feet. The witch sighed and the cat gave up her watchfulness as the troll scampered away. And though the baby shouted for the troll to return, it never heeded, but twisted down the long spiral stairs, and slipping out through a door, was off towards Elfland. As the troll passed over the threshold, the wooden clock ticked again. Lirazel looked at the scroll and looked at her boy, and did not unroll the parchment, but turned and carried it away, and came to her chamber, and locked the scroll in a casket, and left it there unread. For her fears told her well the most potent rune of her father, that she had dreaded so much as she fled from his silver tower, and heard his feet go booming up the brass, had crossed the frontier of twilight, written upon the scroll, and would meet her eyes the moment she unrolled it, and waft her thence. When the rune was safe in the casket, she went to Alveric to tell him of the peril that had come near her. But Alveric was troubled because she would not name the baby, and asked her at once about this. And so she suggested a name at last to him, and it was one that no one in these fields could pronounce, an elvish name full of wonder, and made of syllables like birds' cries at night. Alveric would have none of it, and her whim in this came, as all the whims she had, from no customary thing of these fields of ours, but sheer over the border from Elfland, sheer over the border with all wild fancies that rarely visit our fields. And Alveric was vexed with these whims, for there had been none like them of old in the castle of Earl. None could interpret them to him, and none advise him. He looked for her to be guided by old customs. She looked only for some wild fancy to come from the southeast. He reasoned with her, with the human reason that folk set much store by here, but she did not want reason. And so when they parted, she had not after all told anything of the peril that had sought her from Elfland, which she had come to Alveric to tell. She went instead to her tower, and looked at the casket, shining there in the low, late light, and turned from it, and often looked again, while the light went under the fields, and the gloaming came, and all glimmered away. She sat then by the casement, open towards eastern hills, above whose darkening curves she watched the stars. She watched so long that she saw them change their places. For more than all things else that she had seen since she came to these fields of ours, she had wondered at the stars. She loved their gentle beauty, and yet she was sad as she looked wistfully to them, for Alveric had said that she must not worship them. How if she might not worship them? Could she give them their due? Could she thank them for their beauty? Could she praise their joyful calm? And then she thought of her baby. Then she saw Orion. Then she defied all jealous spirits of air, and looking toward Orion, whom she must never worship, she offered her baby's days to that belted hunter, naming her baby after those splendid stars. And when Alveric came to the tower, she told him of her wish, and he was willing the boy should be named Orion, for all in that valley set much store by hunting. And the hope came back to Alveric, which he would not put away, that being reasonable at last in this, she would now be reasonable in all other things, and be guided by custom, and do what others did, and forsake wild whims and fancies that came over the border from Elfland. And he asked her to worship the holy things of the Freer, for never had she given any of these things their due, and knew not which was the holier, his candlestick or his bell, and never would learn for aught that Alveric told her. And now she answered him pleasantly, and her husband thought all was well. But her thoughts were far with Orion, nor did they ever tarry with grave things long, nor could tarry longer amongst them than butterflies do in the shade. All that night the casket was locked on the rune of the King of Elfland, and next morning Lirazel gave little thought to the rune, for they went with the boy to the holy place of the Freer, and Ziroonderel came with them, but waited without. And the folk of Earl came too, as many as could leave the affairs of man with the fields, and all were there of those that had made the parliament when they went to Alveric's sire in the long red room. And all of these were glad when they saw the boy and marked his strength and growth, and muttering low together as they stood in the holy place, they foretold how all should be as they had planned. And the Freer came forth, and standing amongst his holy things, he gave to the boy before him the name of Orion, though he sooner had given some name of those that he knew to be blessed. And he rejoiced to see the boy, and to name him there. For by the family that dwelt in the castle of Earl, all these folk marked the generations, and watched the ages pass, as sometimes we watch the seasons go over some old known tree. And he bowed himself before Alveric, and was full courteous to Lirazel. Yet his courtesy to the princess came not from his heart, for in his heart he held her in no more reverence than he held a mermaid that had forsaken the sea. And the boy came even so, by the name of Orion. And all the folk rejoiced as he came out with his parents, and rejoined Ziroonderel at the edge of the holy garden. And Alveric, Lirazel, Ziroonderel, and Orion all walked back to the castle. And all that day Lirazel did nothing that caused anybody to wonder, but let herself be governed by custom and the ways of the fields we know. Only when the stars came out and Orion shone, she knew that their splendor had not received its due, and her gratitude to Orion yearned to be said. She was grateful for his bright beauty that cheered our fields, and grateful for his protection, of which she felt sure for her boy, against jealous spirits of air. And all her unsaid thanks so burned in her heart that all of a sudden she rose and left her tower and went out to the open starlight, and lifted her face to the stars and the place of Orion, and stood all dumb, though her thanks were trembling upon her lips. For Alveric had told her one must not pray to the stars. With face upturned to all that wandering host, she stood long silent, obedient to Alveric. Then she lowered her eyes, and there was a small pool glimmering in the night, in which all the faces of the stars were shining. To pray to the stars, she said to herself in the night, is surely wrong. These images in the water are not the stars. I will pray to their images, and the stars will know. And on her knees amongst the iris leaves, she prayed at the edge of the pool, and gave thanks to the images of the stars for the joy she had had of the night, when the constellations shone in their myriad majesty, and moved like an army dressed in silver mail, marching from unknown victories to conquer in distant wars. She blessed and thanked and praised those bright reflections shimmering down in the pool, and bade them tell her thanks and her praise to Orion, to whom she might not pray. It was thus that Alveric found her, kneeling, bent down in the dark, and reproached her bitterly. She was worshipping the stars, he said, which were there for no such purpose, and she said she was only supplicating their images. We may understand his feelings easily, the strangeness of her unexpected acts, her contrariness to all established things, her scorn for custom, her wayward ignorance, jarred on some treasured tradition every day. The more romantic she had been far away over the frontier, as told of by legend and song, the more difficult it was for her to fill any place once held by the ladies of that castle, who were versed in all the lore of the fields we know, and Alveric looked for her to fulfill duties and follow customs which were all as new to her as the twinkling stars. But Lirazel felt only that the stars had not their due, and that custom or reason, or whatever men set store by, should demand that thanks be given them for their beauty. And she had not thanked them even, but had supplicated only their images in the pool. That night she thought of Elfland, where all things were matched with her beauty, where nothing changed and there were no strange customs, and no strange magnificences, like these stars of ours, to whom none gave their due. She thought of the elfin lawns and the towering banks of the flowers, and the palace that may not be told of but only in song. Still locked in the dark of the casket, the rune bided its time. Chapter 9. Lirazel blows away. And the days went by. The summer passed over Earl. The sun that had travelled northward fared south again. It was near to the time when the swallows left those eaves, and Lirazel had not learnt anything. She had not prayed to the stars again, or supplicated their images, but she had learned no human customs, and could not see why her love and gratitude must remain unexpressed to the stars. And Alveric did not know that the time must come when some simple trivial thing would divide them utterly. And then one day, hoping still, he took her with him to the house of the Freer to teach her how to worship his holy things. And gladly, the good man brought his candle and bell and the eagle of brass that held up his book when he read, and a little symbolic bowl that had scented water, and the silver snuffers that put his candle out. And he told her, clearly and simply, as he had told her before, the origin, meaning and mystery of all these things, and why the bowl was of brass and the snuffer of silver, and what the symbols were that were carved on the bowl. With fitting courtesy, he told her these things, even with kindness, and yet there was something in his voice as he told, a little distant from her, and she knew that he spoke as one that walked safe on shore, calling far to a mermaid amid dangerous seas. As they came back to the castle, the swallows were grouped to go, sitting in lines along the battlements, and Lirazel had promised to worship the holy things of the Freer, like the simple, bell-fearing folk of the Valley of Earl. And a late hope was shining in Alveric's mind, that even yet all was well. And for many days she remembered all that the Freer had told her. And one day, walking late from the nursery, past tall windows to her tower, and looking out on the evening, remembering that she must not worship the stars, she called to mind the holy things of the Freer, and tried to remember all she was told of them. It seemed so hard to worship them just as she should. She knew that before many hours, the swallows would all be gone, and often when they left her, her mood would change, and she feared that she might forget and never remember more how she ought to worship the holy things of the Freer. So she went out into the night again over the grasses to where a thin brook ran, and drew out some great flat pebbles that she knew where to find, turning her face away from the images of the stars. By day, the stones shone beautifully in the water, all ruddy and mauve. Now they were all dark. She drew them out and laid them in the meadow. She loved these smooth, flat stones, for somehow they made her remember the rocks of Elfland. She laid them all in a row, this for the candlestick, this for the bell, that for the holy bowl. If I can worship these lovely stones as things ought to be worshipped, she said, I can worship the things of the Freer. Then she kneeled down before the big flat stones and prayed to them as though they were Christum things. And Alveric, seeking her in the wide night, wondering what wild fancy had carried her whither, heard her voice in the meadow, crooning such prayers as are offered to holy things. When he saw the 4 flat stones to which she prayed, bowed down before them in the grass, he said that no worse than this were the darkest ways of the heathen. And she said, I am learning to worship the holy things of the Freer. It is the art of the heathen, he said. Now of all things that men feared in the valley of Earl, they feared most the arts of the heathen, of whom they knew nothing but that their ways were dark. And he spoke with the anger which men always used when they spoke there of the heathen, and his anger went to her heart, for she was but learning to worship his holy things to please him. And yet he had spoken like this, and Alveric would not speak the words that should have been said, to turn aside anger and soothe her. For no man, he foolishly thought, should compromise in matters touching on heatheness. So Lirazel went alone, all sadly, back to her tower, and Alveric stayed to cast the 4 flat stones afar. And the swallows left, and unhappy days went by. And one day, Alveric bade her worship the holy things of the Freer, and she had quite forgotten how. And he spoke again of the arts of heatheness. The day was shining, and the poplars golden, and all the aspens red. Then Lirazel went to her tower, and opened the casket, that shone in the morning with the clear autumnal light, and took in her hand the rune of the King of Elfland, and carried it with her across the high vaulted hall, and came to another tower, and climbed its steps to the nursery. And there all day she stayed and played with her child, with the scroll still tight in her hand. And merrily, though she played at whiles, yet there were strange calms in her eyes, which Ziroonderel watched while she wandered. And when the sun was low, and she had put the child to bed, she sat beside him, all solemn, as she told him childish tales. And Ziroonderel, the wise witch, watched, and for all her wisdom, only guessed how it would be, and knew not how to make it otherwise. And before sunset, Lirazel kissed the boy and unrolled the Elf King's scroll. It was but a petulance that had made her take it from the coffer in which it lay, and the petulance might have passed and she might not have unrolled the scroll, only that it was there in her hand, partly petulance, partly wonder, partly whims too idle to name, drew her eyes to the Elf King's words in their coal-black, curious characters. And whatever magic there was in the rune of which I cannot tell, and dreadful magic there was, the rune was written with love that was stronger than magic, till those mystical characters glowed with the love that the Elf King had for his daughter. And there were blended in that mighty rune 2 powers, magic and love, the greatest power there is beyond the boundary of twilight, with the greatest power there is in the fields we know. And if Alveric's love could have held her, he should have trusted alone to that love. For the Elf King's rune was mightier than the holy things of the Freer. No sooner had Lirazel read the rune on the scroll than fancies from Elfland began to pour over the border. Some came that would make a clerk in the city today leave his desk at once to dance on the seashore, and some would have driven all the men in a bank to leave doors and coffers open and wander away till they came to green open land and the heathery hills. And some would have made a poet of a man all of a sudden as he sat at his business. They were mighty fancies that the Elf King summoned by the force of his magical rune. And Lirazel sat there with the rune in her hand, helpless amongst this mass of tumultuous fancies from Elfland. And as the fancies raged and sang and called, more and more over the border, all crowding on one poor mind, her body grew lighter and lighter. Her feet half rested, half floated upon the floor. Earth scarcely held her down. So fast was she becoming a thing of dreams. No love of hers for Earth, or of the children of Earth for her, had any longer power to hold her there. And now came memories of her ageless childhood beside the tarns of Elfland, by the deep forest's border, by those delirious lawns, or in the palace that may not be told of, except only in song. She saw those things as clearly as we see small shells in water, looking through clear ice down to the floor of some sleeping lake, a little dimmed in that other region across the barrier of ice. So too her memories shone a little dimly from across the frontier of Elfland. Little queer sounds of elfin creatures came to her. Scents swam from those miraculous flowers that glowed by the lawns she knew. Faint sounds of enchanted songs blew over the border and reached her seated there. Voices and melodies and memories came floating through the twilight. All Elfland was calling. Then measured and resonant, and strangely near, she heard her father's voice. She rose at once, and now Earth had lost on her the grip that it only has on material things, and a thing of dreams and fancy and fable and fantasy, she drifted from the room. And Ziroonderel had no power to hold her with any spell, nor had she herself the power even to turn, even to look at her boy as she drifted away. And at that moment, a wind came out of the northwest and entered the woods and bared the golden branches and danced on over the downs and led a company of scarlet and golden leaves that had dreaded this day. But dance now it had come, and away with a riot of dancing and glory of colour, high in the light of the sun that had set from the sight of the fields, went wind and leaves together. With them went Lirazel. That is the end of tonight's reading. The Elf King wrote a rune in the old script of Elfland, in a language older than anything in the fields we know. And Lirazel read it, and it called to something in her that the mortal world had never quite reached. And she blew away. And then something else happened. Something quieter, and in some ways stranger. Elfland itself moved. The border, which had been no more than 20 or 25 miles from the village of Earl, retreated. The pale blue mountains drew back from the horizon. The golden air withdrew. The wall of twilight moved east and kept moving and did not stop. And the plain that was left behind, where Elfland had been, was grey and flat and ordinary, as though it had never been otherwise. Alveric is alone. Orion is very young, and the place that Alveric would go to find what he has lost is no longer where it was. Next is episode 4, The Unenchanted Plain. Moth is asleep. You can be too.